Namaskar, good evening. You're watching Nation Wants to Know and I'm Swati Joshi. Well, in a big breakthrough in the AI171 plane crash investigation, the silent witness or the black box has been found after hours of relentless searching among charred metal, rooftop rubble and mangled debris. The flight data recorder, which is critical to decoding what went wrong after takeoff, has been recovered from a rooftop at the BJ Medical College crash site in Ahmedabad. So what is the black box? It will play a vital role in unraveling the cause that led to one of the deadliest plane crashes in India. The black box, its name is black box, but it is typically a bright orange device for easy visibility amid debris and underwater as well. It contains crucial information such as flight speed, altitude, engine performance and cockpit audio, including communication between the pilots and the air traffic control. It is built to withstand extreme temperatures, water and severe impact, ensuring the survival of key data even in catastrophic conditions. So let me tell you now what is expected to take place. Now that the black box has been found, what are the steps that we are looking at from here on? What is going to happen? We have John Gredick, aviation expert, joining us on the broadcast. We have John Strickland, aviation consultant and director, JLS Consulting, and we also have Dr. Jason Knight, senior lecturer in fluid mechanics. Let me in fact first go across to Mr. John Gredick. Do you find anything unusual in the takeoff from the video that we can all see about 27 seconds when the aircraft is airborne to the crash landing that takes place, all just within a minute?
Yeah, there is something very unusual. The airplane crashed. And that's not something that we want to see happen, particularly on a new generation airplane such as a 787. The takeoff roll down the runway. If there was anything wrong with the engines or the avionics on board the airplane, the captain would have been able to reject takeoff and not roll off the end of the runway. No indication of any rejection of takeoff. Captain rotated the airplane. Airplane went airborne. And within 2 or 3 seconds, we noticed, lack of power to the engines. They got to 600 feet, and the engines seemed to have lost thrust. And the airplane flattened out in terms of attitude, and then slowly lost attitude, as if the airplane did not have any power left to create lift on the aircraft.
Mr. Gredick, it was still on the runway path. There was no deviation from that. Now, when you say loss of power, struggling to lift, struggling to gain altitude or loss of thrust, what could possibly be the reason? Or are there several reasons and at the moment we can't put our finger on just one?
Well, the obvious answer is the engines weren't developing enough power. For some reason, there was an inability of the engines to provide thrust required to maintain flight. And there are a number of reasons, number of causes that may be there. There may be, fuel starvation. There could be, contaminated fuel. There could be a number of reasons why those engines did not generate enough thrust. So we're going to have to wait for that flight data recorder to be able to provide us with information about the status of that and of both engines. But the question is that a bird strike? Could be, but usually when you have a bird strike, you have some indication, visual, of damage to the engine. You have smoke, you have flameouts. None of that. Everything was normal on the rollout. Everything was normal on the up-pitch. And it just, as it climbed, it lost power. So we don't know the answer. Right.
The mystery is only deepening. But John Strickland, we're here talking about aircraft with state-of-the-art facility and technology. There may have been concerns, but never a fatal crash like this. This is the first fatal crash of a 787 Dreamliner. So why did the uncrashable crash land is a question that many are finding difficult to answer and are absolutely shocked to witness what transpired.
Well, you're right. There's never been a fatal crash of a Boeing 787, and we should put it in context. There are over 1,000 of these aircraft flying worldwide, not only with Air India, but airlines in many parts of the globe. It's an aircraft which is both popular with the airlines who bought it and with passengers flying on it. The type has been in service for more than a decade. There has been no other fatal accident. It's a reliable aircraft, a dependable aircraft. And as we've said already, we have to wait now for the actual safety investigation to find out what caused this particular crash of the 787.
But what are your views on the revelations that were made by whistleblower Sam Salipur about manufacturing flaws? When he said, sections are assembled by various agencies or companies and they don't fit right. He had raised these concerns, saying, I'm speaking because I want to avoid a crash. I am saying this all based on my experience. He says, as the aircraft ages, it can prove to be catastrophic. What are your views on that?
Well, of course, Boeing, if we put aside Boeing as a company and the specifics of this tragic crash, Boeing has really been going through the mill quite justifiably for lapses in quality of manufacture, safety standards. There were two tragic accidents in 2018 and 2019 with a completely different type of Boeing aircraft, the Boeing 737 MAX. That's what led to the whole process we've seen in recent years of a deep investigation into Boeing's production techniques and lapses in terms of quality and safety. There have been questions raised about assembly of Boeing 787 aircraft too as part of that process. All of it is being addressed by the regulator in the USA, the safety regulator, the Federal Aviation Authority. Other regulators around the world have paid attention to this. Boeing certainly lost an awful lot of credibility, understandably, because it was seen previously as the most dependable, safe company you could wish for in the industry, going back almost a century since it started to make commercial airliners. It now has to rebuild that trust and get back to that position that it has to be in. But even with all that backdrop, there is nothing yet that we could correlate with those challenges or the failures that led to the crashes of two Boeing 737 aircraft with what we've seen happen yesterday on this Boeing 787.
Dr. Knight, what do you mean when you say fuel contamination can be one of the possible reasons? And how does that impact the ability of the pilot to try to control the flight? How does that compromise safety?
Yeah, well, there could be a number of different factors that cause this incident. Fuel contamination could be one, but there are many others. It appears from the footage and also from the Mayday signal released by the captain that he had no thrust. The aircraft could fly perfectly well on one engine, take off and land perfectly well, but with no thrust, it seems likely that there was a dual engine failure, which could be a number of different reasons. I noticed on at the point of takeoff, there seemed to be a cloud of dust, and that could have been some debris. It could have been something in the engine, or indeed sort of through the engine that created that, but of course it's difficult to tell. I'm sure the investigators will be looking at all the data from the black box to see exactly what happened. It's too early to tell what happened, but it's clear that the pilot was still in control of the aircraft, and he did his best to try and bring the aircraft down as safely as he could. The facts, it's extremely tragic, and all our thoughts go out to all the people, the families that have been caught up in this. But there were, I think, 8 people's lives lost on the ground. It could have been much worse. So the pilot was faced with a very difficult decision and tried to bring the aircraft down as best he could with very limited time. He obviously had no option but to do an emergency landing and very little time to do one.
John Bradick, would you agree with him that very little time to respond and react, and to, the height of the plane, the distance of the aircraft from the ground was very less. So there was very less space for the pilot to also maneuver. Also, just by looking at the footage, can you, comment on whether or not the fact that the landing gear was not retracted was creating a drag, or the angle of the flaps was something that may have led to this?
Well, we have people that have been looking at videos, some experts, that have examined the positioning of equipment on board the airplane, and you notice that the flaps were not extended. Typically, when you in fact look at a takeoff, you have flaps that have been extended. and typically the landing gear is retracted within about 30 seconds of takeoff. So in this aircraft, it doesn't seem to have the flaps, extended. The landing gear is still, deployed. I think the cabin crew, the cockpit crew, was just managing to deal with the loss of thrust. The checklist that they usually have for these types of retraction and stowing of equipment was, put aside, and they were just trying to save that airplane and the passengers on board the airplane through whatever means they could. When you see the nose up position, as you see in the video, that's an indication that the flight crew was in fact trying to maintain, attitude and to try to maneuver the airplane ever so slightly, even with the loss of powers. That aircraft, the flight crew knew full well that they were in trouble and they were trying to, in fact, minimize impact on the ground. And as Jason said, there was a valiant effort by the crew to try to minimize ground damage. And unfortunately, we had some fatalities on the ground.
But when you talk about Boeing 787, the Dreamliner, and this is what experts have been saying here in India and globally as well, that, both the engines failing, dual engine failure is something which may happen, in the rarest of the rarest occasion. And even if you're talking about bird hit, that would need a large number of birds, isn't it, for them to cause disruption and lead to dual engine failure. And one thing that everybody is finding very difficult to cope up with is just in the very first minute, in just 27 seconds, it was all over.
Yeah, that airplane took off with both engines working. So when that airplane rotated off the runway, both engines were working. Within seconds,
yes,
both engines were off. That is unthinkable as to what happened and how that happened. So it really is something that we have to evaluate fairly quickly. I think, again, back to the black boxes to find out, what the engines were doing, and at what point in time in this whole timeline of flight did those engines cut out. And I think that's going to help us try to understand the circumstances of this crash.
Absolutely. John Strickland, should there now be a conversation around safety when it comes to the Boeings? Should there be an independent review? Do you think that would perhaps, help better understand the situation? Because it's not just about India and not just about Dreamliner. It's about the other fleets as well.
Well, there is always a standard process by which any accident is investigated globally, with the safety authority of the country where the accident happened being the lead. So here it's the Indian safety authorities. The manufacturer is involved, the engine manufacturer, and the airline too. So that all takes time. It's fortunate that we have the black box, or at least one of them recovered already. We have these bits of visual evidence, and undoubtedly the actual physical evidence will be used as well. So that is the best channel of investigation as opposed to any other independent review. Of course, I mentioned the challenges Boeing has had as a company, and it's been under review anyway,
yes,
significantly because of those challenges for the last few years. It's on its third CEO since those crashes happened that I mentioned in 2018, 2019. He came in only about this time last year. He has an excellent record as an experienced engineer and a leader in the airline manufacturing business, and he's certainly demonstrating everything we see externally, doing all the right things to bring the company back to where it needs to be, but it's still under the scrutiny of regulation. I think those factors, the scrutiny of Boeing and waiting for the outcome of the actual accident investigation team, are the right mechanisms to ultimately pass judgment about the 787 and indeed any aircraft that is involved in an accident.
Dr. Knight, how much time does it take for data to be retrieved, to be accessed, to be analyzed once you recover the black box?
Yeah, the engineers will be working sort of round the clock to get that data out and secured. I would guess somewhere between 24 and 48 hours they'll have an idea, but it could take longer depending on the damage, but something around those timescales. But then they'll need time to analyze the data and to interpret it and work out exactly what's happened.
All information can actually be accessed, and can it help us understand what transpired in those 27 seconds? John Grader, can actually help us break down the details second by second?
Oh, it'll do it. It'll do to microseconds. So, that flight data recorder is digital data. It's monitoring hundreds of various systems on board that aircraft. So we'll have more than just second by second. We'll have, about a millisecond, about a microsecond, what was going on with each of those major pieces of equipment on board the airplane. And of course, the cockpit recorder will, in fact, have the voices recorded of both members of the flight crew. So we'll have a pretty real-time ability to reconstruct both the aircraft and the cockpit activities in almost 27 seconds.
I guess at this point of time, all we have are the theories, the speculations, and individual analysis that is being put out. We'll have to wait for the data to be recovered and analyzed to actually understand what transpired in just those 27 seconds that led to this fatal crash. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on the broadcast.